Greetings, travelers! I am Justice here with the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan card review, the first part. As it seems to tend to do, my animal companion has rolled Owen once again, so he is here with me for this.
Meow.
Very good. All right. So let's get right into it. I think one of the most interesting things about the new expansion that was revealed right away is the existence of cards that no longer fall into the category of neutral that can be used by everybody or can only be used by one class. The new thing here is the gangs, so to speak. Each gang is comprised of 3 of the 9 classes, and now there's 3 different cards that can be used by any of those 3 classes. So let's quick go over them. The first is Grime Street Informant, 2 mana 1/1. Battlecry discovers a hunter, paladin, or warrior card. That's one of the gangs. I will quick say that for all of these, you will get an option of one of each of those classes. So you'll discover 1 hunter, 1 paladin, 1 warrior card. The next one is Cabal Courier, which is a 3 mana 2/2. Again, Battlecry discovers a mage, priest, or warlock card. And then we have the third one, which is Lotus Agents, a 5 mana 5/3. Battlecry discovers a druid, rogue, or shaman card. Quick first impressions. I don't know how much constructed play any of these are really going to see, just since they are understated. I will say the advantages here. I think Grime Street Informant probably will see the most play out of any of them, just simply for the lowest mana cost. It allows you to fill up your curve. It allows you to potentially look for plays that are earlier on that can interact with the board, that can help advance your game state. Cabal Courier could still see some play. It is a 3 mana 2/2. Lotus Agents feels a little underwhelming. The stat line of 5/3 for 5 mana and then trying to use the card that you get off of it can get a little awkward. Overall, I think these actually are pretty exciting for Arena. They are going to allow classes to do things that they could never do before, so I think it's going to be interesting. How much constructed play that they are going to see remains to be seen, but I really like the direction that they're going, where we're no longer limited to either one class or all classes, where now we have some things that only a few classes are going to be able to do. So I think we'll see exactly how much that gets explored throughout the expansion, but it is a pretty exciting mechanic, and we'll see just how much play these cards actually see. Now, speaking of the tri-class mechanic, so to speak, leads us into our first legendary, and Owen, why don't you take that away?
So one of the cool things about the upcoming set is that each of the gangs, as it were, will have a legendary minion associated with them, which will represent the gang bosses. And so the gang boss of the Cabal, which is, if you're keeping track, that's the warlock, priest, and mage gang, is Kazakus, and he is a 4 mana 3/3. And I think he has one of the most interesting battle cries I've ever seen on a minion. And basically, it says that if you have a deck that has no duplicates, you get to make a custom spell. um, and so the way that this mechanic works is basically you get 3 discovers. Your first discover gives you a 1 cost, 5 cost, or 10 cost. You choose what size spell you want, and then you're given a choice of 2 effects. So another discover, you pick one of 3 effects, then another discover, one of 3 effects. There are over 100 combinations of spells that you can make with this card, as Ben Brode has stated.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this spell is going to be able to do anything from, deal direct damage to a minion, to gain armor, to summon tokens, to polymorph things. And I think that it is a really powerful card, I think, and will really be able to really, I think it'll be a really strong card. One of the cool things is that you will get to be able to play this guy with Reno Jackson for a little bit, so I'm pretty excited about that as well. My predictions is that we'll see him probably in Reno Lock, and maybe if the effect is strong enough on its own, we'll see it in other classes as well.
Awesome. All right, so there's our first big legendary of the day. Why don't we move on to our second, going with our druid class cards? What do you got for us?
Okay, so I've got 2 Druid class cards coming up here. The first one I'll talk about is Kuhn, the Forgotten King. Um, so basically, he is a 0 mana 7/7. Okay, I'm kidding. He's a 10 mana 7/7, but he has choose one: either gain 10 armor or refresh your mana crystals. So once you have 10 mana, he can effectively be a 0 mana 7/7. Or if you're in the position where you need life, he can give you a big chunk of armor. I think it might be a little ambitious to hope that you can play this guy in the same turn as Fandral, but with two innervates, you never know. Um, I think that he's obviously also very strong with Aviana as well, but I think it's cool. Gives Druid a good high tempo play later in the game, along with Arcane Giants. Speaking of tempo, the next card that we're going to look at is a spell, Lunar Visions. It's a 5-mana spell. It says draw 2 cards, and all of your minions that you draw with this effect cost 2 mana less. And I think again, it's just along the lines of Druid, just having more tempo options for the mid to late portion of the game. So this kind of lets you bank some mana, draw some cards, and then if you live the dream and draw 2 minions, then you get to play them for significantly cheaper after the fact.
Awesome.
So I think overall it's a decent card. I don't know if it's better than Nourish. I don't know that it would replace Nourish, but it's an interesting effect and not a one that we see very often.
Right, definitely. All right, so continuing our Druid theme, I actually have two different cards here that kind of both are probably going to work best in some sort of token Druid list. The first is Pilfer Power for 3 mana. Gain an empty mana crystal for each friendly minion. This card has the potential to both be kind of a dead draw in that on an empty board or when you have one minion, it's not great. Obviously, on an empty board, it does nothing. On a board with one minion, it's just a wild growth that costs an extra mana, so it's not great there. When you start building up your board, it can actually do a lot, and that's why I say I think it's going to work well with a token list. Because anything that can just generate a lot of tokens, a lot of 1/1s, suddenly you can ramp from say 5 mana to like 8 or 9 on one turn, which is actually kind of nuts. So it's a high risk, high reward kind of card. It'll be interesting to see how that one goes. And speaking of cards that work well with tokens, how about Mark of the Lotus, which is 1 mana, give your minions +1/+1. This is very, very exciting for any sort of token druid list. It's actually I would expect it to be a very strong card in those lists. Obviously, even just by itself with Violet Teacher, immediately is going to give you a 4/6 Violet Teacher and 2/2 token. Which just by itself is already strong. And then again, any token list is really just looking to have board presence. So you have a few things out just for 1 mana, you just suddenly buff your board by a huge amount. I think this is going to be a very strong card for any sort of token druid list.
Yeah, for sure. So going on, we have a couple of of the cards that have been spoiled. We have 1 Hunter card and 1 Mage card. So first up, I'll be talking about the Hunter card. It's a new weapon that they have, a new toy, named Piranha Launcher. And it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's a 5 mana 2/4 weapon, and its effect is, after your hero attacks, summon a 1/1 Piranha. Now, this is pretty comparable to, I think, Assassin's Blade. If you get to extract all of the value out of it, it can actually produce a lot more damage than that. I'll be interested to see whether or not the piranhas are beasts. If they are, that has a whole lot of other different implications. But for now, I'm going to evaluate the card as though they are not, because I don't know for sure yet. I think that this is too slow to be used in most Hunter decks. If we get a plethora of options from Hunter that make mid-range or slower Hunter decks even better, then maybe this will see play, but I don't really think that this card's very good, both in Constructed and in Arena. I also don't see this card doing a whole lot of work. I think by turn 5, if you're using your weapon to ram into things, it's probably not that great. I don't know. I just think that 2 attack is too low. Next up is the single mage card that's been previewed so far. It's a pretty exciting card, I think, for any sort of grinding mage deck or Reno Jackson mage deck or anything of the sort. It's a 3 mana 3/4 named Manic Soulcaster. It's an epic, and its battle cry is choose a friendly minion and shuffle a copy of it into your deck. So using this effect, it allows you to get copies number 3 and 4 of some of your key minions. It allows you to duplicate cards like Reno Jackson or other key minions in your grinding deck. I think that you're not going to probably curve this out too often. But I think the mere fact that it is a 3/4 means that it's not the end of the world if you do have to tempo this thing out just to contest the board. So I think it's a pretty exciting card. I think that anything that makes Reno Mage slightly more viable is exciting, in grinding mage decks more viable. I find very exciting. So I'm pretty stoked to see this card's effect. I'm looking forward to duplicating it with Bran in the future.
And speaking of duplicate, I think that's actually a neat thing because duplicate was one of the really cool cards in the past with grindy mage decks that got rotated out in standard. So this, in a sense, can almost kind of take that place. I think that's pretty cool. So moving on to our next class, we have Paladin. I'm going to start out with a bang here with the new legendary. It's a 3-mana 2/2 Wicker Flame Burn Bristle. It has something that before this was kind of reserved just for Tyrion, which was the 2 keywords of Divine Shield and Taunt. Obviously, he's a little bit smaller than Tyrion, but it does have an interesting effect. Damage dealt by this minion also heals your hero. Paladin still working on cementing themselves as the class that actually does the most healing, not Priest, even though, it's supposed to be Priest thing, but hey. It is a little interesting. The Divine Shield Taunt combo is, as I said, was pretty unique before this. So it does give some pretty interesting interactions. Since it is only a 2/2, it's not hard to kill. Of course, that means that generally it should be guaranteeing to heal yourself for at least 2, since it's going to have to be attacked at least once, usually. Of course, with the Divine Shield, the hope is that they can't use a spell to break the Divine Shield or to kill it, so it heals you for at least 4. So if it heals you for at least 4, if it trades into a minion for only 3 mana, you know what, that's actually pretty good. The number of times that this is going to work exactly the way you want it to is maybe iffy, so I'm not sure exactly how much play this card will see. I think it's worth playing around with and kind of seeing, how much value you can really get out of it. And of course, it's going to depend on the speed of the metagame once the expansion hits. Our next card is a new Paladin secret called Getaway Kodo. Like all Paladin secrets, it is 1 mana. And its effect is when a friendly minion dies, return it to your hand. So this is somewhat reminiscent of Redemption in that it does trigger when a friendly minion dies. Whether it's better or worse really depends on the minion. On some of them, getting it back on the board immediately is better. However, there are times where you'd rather replay it, such as if it has an important battle cry, or if having 1 health on the minion doesn't matter, but getting to replay it at full health, might make it much better. So there are situations where Redemption will be better than Getaway Kodo and vice versa, but it just gives you another option to keep your board somewhat sticky in that, it's hard to get rid of your minions, and I think that's something that any Paladin deck that's running Secrets is probably going to be pretty happy about.
One other application about the Getaway Kodo that I was really excited about is its implication in grinding style Paladin decks, which is more like along the lines of what the old mid-range Paladin deck used to do at sometimes. But basically, being able to combine this in a way with a high value minion such as an Ivory Knight or Tyrion, for instance, or even N'Zoth, really gives your deck a lot more grinding power. So in a way, it's kind of like a miniature duplicate that's a little bit easier to fit into your turn. So again, really exciting.
Definitely.
So moving on, we have a interesting new direction that it seems like Blizzard wants to take Paladin, and that's a card called Small Time Recruits. And it's a 3-mana spell that lets you draw 3 1-cost minions from your deck. And so before I get into the implications of the card, I'm going to also talk about the other card that was spoiled alongside it, Mean Street Marshal. So Mean Street Marshal is a 1-mana 1/2, and its death rattle is if this minion has 2 or more attack, draw a card. So I think that these cards work somewhat well together. It seems like they want to kind of see if they can take Paladin in a direction where they have an emphasis on small minions that are then buffed up, using cards like Competitive Spirit, using cards like Blessing of Might, Blessing of Kings, Silver Moon Portal, and buffing is something that Paladin has always done. But I think one of the weaknesses of those kind of decks a lot of times is you would run out of steam, and you were really leaning very heavily on Divine Favor to dig you back out of that hole. The problem is that a lot of the times, if you're playing against another aggressive deck, that your Divine Favor is either dead when you draw it after your hand is empty and the opponent's hand is empty, or it just doesn't draw you enough cards to really get you to really keep you up with the other guy. So I think that this is an interesting alternative to Divine Favor, in that it allows you to make sure that you're drawing more gas, basically, for your aggressive small deck. Additionally, it also has applications in that it lets you draw 3 1-cost minions, which means that depending on what those minions are, and depending on how you sculpt your deck, you can actually control exactly what those minions are, similar to how the Curator can be utilized to draw specific minions from your deck. And so I think that you could even consider using cards like Sir Finley Myrtleton or other, high value one cost minions, um, to kind of use it as kind of like a toolbox option depending on what you can find for it. So again, pretty nifty card. With a Mean Street Marshal, I think that it also has some really cool synergy with cards like Abusive Sergeant and whatnot. Being able to play it on one, and then turn two, you could play, card plus Abusive Sergeant, trade the guy in, and now it's a 3/2. So you don't have to worry about like giving it a permanent buff. You could even use just like a temporary buff like Abusive or Dark Iron Dwarf to, get that cantrip and get that draw.
All right. Awesome. All right, so now we're gonna get into the class that I think most people, or at least a lot of people, feel probably needed love more than almost any other, which is Priest. And I'm actually super excited about some of the cards that are coming in. Priest was actually the first class that I ever played in Hearthstone back when I had no idea what I was doing, and I just thought it was cool. And as any of you who have kind of followed along with me know, I love dragons. I have spent more time with dragon-based decks in one way or another than I have with anything else. And Dragon Priest is in a decent spot right now, and I think it's going to get a lot better with this expansion. It's going to be thanks in no small part to these next cards coming up. The first one is Draconid Operative, a 5 mana 5/6 battle cry for holding a dragon. Discover a card in your opponent's deck. There are many implications to this card. I'm going to try to get through them quickly. First off, having a 5 mana dragon with good stats is something that Dragon Priest has not had before. It's typically relied on Azure Drake in that spot, and don't get me wrong, I love me some Azure Drake. But the Dragon Priest deck actually doesn't run a whole lot with spell power in it, or that it can benefit from spell power, rather. You have like your Holy Nova, which is, not great, and still 10 mana to play it, on the same turn as an Azure Drake. The card draw is good, but it's not been the most ideal card. Draconid Operative is a much bigger body at 5/6, and it allows you to discover a card from your opponent's deck, which means you sometimes can find answers that your own deck doesn't have. And also, if you are playing a longer game, it means you're not digging yourself closer to fatigue. So this card is actually a huge deal for Dragon Priest, and I'm very, very excited about it. There's really even more to talk about with it, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next one. This is going to be another card that is definitely going to see play in Dragon Priest. It's called Dragonfire Potion for 6 mana. Deal 5 damage to all minions except dragons. So, if you have a board full of dragons, and your opponent has a board full of non-dragons, guess who's going to be much happier after this card is played? Now, it is important to remember that when you're playing Dragon Priest, you are playing non-dragon minions as well, whether that be Wormrest Agent or Blackwing Corruptor, these types of things. So it's not guaranteed that it won't hurt your board as well, so you do have to kind of pick your spots with it. There's also the fact that Azure Drake, speaking of, is played in almost every deck, so it's not necessarily a guaranteed board wipe. But it is still very, very strong. And the thing is, too, is that this card can even be played in just Control Priest, not even Dragon Priest. Simply as a sort of Light Bomb replacement. Control Priest played Light Bomb, even if it would clear their own board, sometimes that was relevant, because with a controlling deck, if you fall behind on board, sometimes it can be very difficult to come back. So this card still does a lot of damage to minions, and I think it's going to see play probably in both Dragon and non-Dragon Priest lists. So I'm very, very excited about these. The last one I'm going to talk about is not a dragon, unfortunately. But it's still an interesting priest card called Cabal Talon Priest. It's a 3 mana 3/4 battle cry. Give a friendly minion +3 health. Obviously, there are a lot of comparisons to be drawn between this card and the now rotated out Dark Cultist, which had the same stats but was Death Rattle. Give a friendly minion +3 health. Obviously, there's a few differences here. Dark Cultist could just be played on turn 3 on an empty board and still represent something that your opponent had to deal with. Talon Priest cannot. On the flip side of that, however, Cultist was on a Death Rattle, so you didn't always control when its effect occurred, and it targeted a random minion. Talon Priest is a battle cry, which means you're controlling when it goes off, and you get to pick the minion. So there's, positives and negatives comparing the two cards, but they are different enough that they are each their own card, and I don't think it's fair to say, oh, this is just a better or worse Dark Cultist. It is its own card, and it can have some practical applications in a priest deck that is really looking to take advantage of, having minions that are being able to repeatedly trade thanks to their high health total. So it is something that's very interesting.
Yeah, and speaking of taking minions and trading them, the next card that I think we'll talk about will be Potion of Madness, and boy, oh boy, is this a card. Super exciting. It's 1 mana, gain control of an enemy minion that has 2 attack or less until the end of the turn. And while it's not written on the card, since it reads just like Shadow Menace, I'm going to assume that it also gives the minion charge,
It does.
which is relevant.
It
So
does.
basically, this is one of the perfect cards that a priest deck that's looking to control and stave off aggro has been looking for. I've seen controlling priest decks run Shadow Madness as a 4 mana, kill 2 minions, and this, depending on the shape of the metagame, this could be very similar to that and cost a lot less mana. So overall, I think that this is going to be a really strong option for any priest deck that's going to be trying to exist in a metagame where it isn't interested in trying to fight for the board early. It's interested in just trying to keep it clear enough so that it can get to the late game for your, dark Dragonfire potions and the like. So I think really exciting card, and it combines perfectly with another new card that replaced a much felt void in the souls and whatnot of all priest players, and that was the hole in our hearts left when Shrinkmeister left rotation. And of course, this means I'm talking about the new pint-sized potion. So for 1 mana, it's a spell that gives all enemy minions -3 attack for this turn only. And anyone who used to play Priest from back in the day will likely remember combining their Shrinkmaster with cards like Cabal Shadow Priest and Shadow Word Pain. And these are all things that you're going to be able to do with Pint-Sized Potion. You're going to be able to play your Pint-Sized Potion and steal your enemy 5 attack minion that now has 2 attack and can be grabbed by the Cabal Shadow Priest or Shadow Word Pain it. We also have a new option that came out in Whispers of the Old Gods, a card that did not see a lot of play because there weren't a ton of 2 attack or less minions in the metagame at the time to justify it. But Pint-Sized Potion does combine favorably with Shadow Word Horror, which means for 5 mana and 2 cards you can destroy all minions in play that have 5 attack or less. So I think that this is a really good card and a very interesting option. Probably not going to happen all that often, is you can also utilize it to just have your board trade into the enemy's minions to, make your guys live and theirs not. Probably not going to happen too often, but it's still an option that you can do. So I wouldn't actually be surprised if this found its way into a more tempo-based priest deck in addition to controlling priest deck. So super excited about this, super excited about the Potion of Madness, and I look forward to chugging all of the potions as a priest coming in the future.
Yes, because after all, that's what priests are for. Yeah, so we're gonna cut off part 1 of our card review right here, but I think so far there's some really exciting stuff. We're seeing classes doing things that they couldn't do before, or enabling them to do certain things better than they could previously. I think this is actually looking pretty darn cool so far, and yeah, really looking forward to getting to part 2 of the video where we finish out the cards.
Yes, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know if there's anything else you want us to talk about.
All right, we will see you guys soon.